I'm Katie. I'm a disability lawyer, and I'm here today to answer the question of how to prove that you were the primary caregiver. This is important when you're applying for a CPP because it's going to affect the amount of contributions that you have into the CPP. And that's what they use to calculate the amounts of your benefits, as well as for CPP disability, it can affect the time where you have to prove that you were disabled. There's something called the child rearing provision that helps basically improve that calculation for people who stop working or reduce their hours in order to take care of their children when they were young, basically. So if you qualify for the child rearing provision, it lets you sort of drop those years out of your calculation so that they don't reduce your benefits. So the question is, how do you prove you were the primary caregiver? And what that means overall is the person who was most responsible for their day-to-day needs in terms of preparing meals, putting them to bed, the things that you have to do for children. Obviously, in some families, the parents are going to split those duties, but it's typically the person who spends more time doing that. For the purposes of the child rearing provision, Service Canada looks at which parent was receiving the Canada Child Benefit, which is a benefit through the Canada Revenue Agency, basically to help families with kids to help support them. So if you were receiving that benefit, then you're considered to be the primary caregiver. So if you were the person who stayed home and that benefit was paid to you in your name, then that's pretty straightforward. There's a section on the CPP application where you just fill in the information that they ask for about your children, the times that the years that you were staying home with them or reducing your hours, and that yes, you are the person who received the Canada Child Benefit. Some people will not qualify for the Canada Child Benefit because they made too much money. So if you applied and didn't receive it only because you made too much money, then that also will be fine. You just fill that in on your application and they'll have that information on file and you shouldn't have any problems. There are a couple situations where it can be a little more complicated. If you were the person who stayed home with the kids, but the other parent was the one who received the Canada Child Benefit. So the reason that happens sometimes is the Canada Child Benefit by default is paid to the female parent. It's a little bit outdated, but that's how they do it. So obviously in some families, it's the father who stays home and, not every family has a female parent. Some families have two female parents and so on. Anyway, so if you were not the female parent and you were the one who stayed home with the kids and the money was paid to the other parent for the Canada Child Benefit, that can cause problems for you. You can have that change. You can ask Canada Revenue Agency to say, hey, I'm the one staying home, pay the money in my name, and they'll do that. So again, if you did that at the time and the money was actually paid to you, then you won't have a problem. You just fill that in on your form. But some people, for whatever reason, they don't ask the Canada Revenue Agency to change who they pay it to because at the end of the day, it's all going to the kids in the same place. So they just don't bother. And then years later, you're applying for CPP and realize this is going to affect your contributions. In that case, on the CPP application, there's a section for the other parent to waive their rights to the child rearing provision. So basically, that just means that they sign off on that to say that they weren't the one who stayed home, that even though they received the benefit, you were the one who stayed home. That means that they won't be able to claim the child rearing provision, but again, if they weren't the primary caregiver, then they shouldn't be able to claim that anyway. The other situation people sometimes run into is where they never applied for the Canada Child Benefit. So in that case, there's no record with the CRA that you received it because you didn't. So in that case, what Service Canada asks you to do is to contact the CRA and ask them for a letter saying that you would have been eligible for that benefit if you had applied. You may have to provide some documentation to prove your eligibility, but you should be able to get that letter and provide it to Service Canada. So that is how to prove you were the primary caregiver. The answer is basically whether you received the candidate child benefit, and if not, to get a statement from the CRA saying that you would have been eligible if you had applied. I'm Katie, I'm a disability lawyer, and we'll see you next time.